Hey everyone, welcome to the first episode of the latest in politics with Sam Morgan. Now, this is the first episode we'll be talking about, so let me introduce sort of what this series is going to be about. So we're going to talk about pretty much news. We'll see how good I am at that. So, pretty much news stories that I think are interesting, worth talking about, I have picked, and I have currently up here. I'm going to sort of read through them. I'm going to try and get better at this to where I don't have to have news articles up for me to cover them as time goes on. I'm also going to try and get that headline working at the bottom of the screen. You see right here. It should be right here when that's not on screen. That is going to be used later, but I have to get it working first. And this has been on short notice. I wanted to get the first episode out today. So introducing the other things you see on the screen, I'll get those in it real quick. The MP logo, that is my channel logo. You may or may not have known that. So it stands for Morgan Politics. It's blue and red because Democrats and Republicans. Nothing too much to say there. And at the top left, that is the logo for the show, The Latest in Politics. You're going to see that logo for every episode, at least. I have logos for a couple of the series we're going to do. Some of them I still have to make. Once again, work in progress. We're just starting this thing off. And if you're wondering also how the scheduling is going to go, Saturdays and Sundays and weekends, we're not going to do episodes of this, news, anything. If we do videos on the weekend, it's going to be other series that we can sort of do, like for example, a closer look, which is another series we're going to do, which takes a closer examination of a certain, election, a certain race. But yeah. Now on to the actual stuff we're going to cover. And so let's start with the stuff we're always going to cover. The approval rating of the president as of the episode. And we're going to be using 538 because 538 is one of the more reliable places. They do have a very decent model comparatively to other places. And today, Donald Trump's approval rating is 42%. His disapproval rating is 53%. That is not a good rating. Certainly not as good as it has been. He was peaking a little bit ago. Now, I think a lot of this has to do with the family separation policy. And he's also, the tariffs are hurting him as well. And of course, this is not good for the Republicans in 2018. And, well, that is the first story we've covered already. See how quick that was? Now let's go to the generic ballot. Currently, Democrats lead with 47.9% to the Republicans 39.5%. If you round, that is 48 to 40, meaning they're leading by 8. Most people say they need to win the national House vote by around 6 to 7 points in order to win control of the House of Representatives. So that's bad news for Republicans because if this holds or expands, Democrats are taking control of the House of Representatives, though most people think the Democrats are the narrow favorites to take control of the House anyway. Still bad news, and that's still a pretty decent lead for the Democrats as of this moment in time. So that's 2 stories already down, and we're going to cover this every time to keep check on it. Now, let's go to a Senate vote that was pretty recent. The Senate took a bipartisan swipe at President Trump on Tuesday when it overwhelmingly approved a motion of support for NATO. The 97-2 vote reflects the broad concerns on Capitol Hill over Trump's seeming ambivalence about the alliance and his commitment to it. The vote came the same day Trump arrived in Brussels, Belgium, for a summit of NATO nations, and shortly before he heads to Helsinki, Finland, for a one-on-one session with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Before he landed in Brussels, Trump tweeted some of his concerns about NATO. Many countries in NATO, which we are expected to defend, are not only short of their current commitment of 2%, which is low, but are also delinquent for many years in payments that have not been made. Will they reimburse the U.S.? Senator Jack Reed, the Rhode Island Democrat who authored the non-binding motion, spoke on the Senate floor. No one should ever doubt the United States resolve in meeting its commitment to the mutual defense of the NATO alliance, Reed said. Unfortunately, this motion has become necessary because some of our closest allies have come to question the U.S. commitment to collective self-defense. President Trump has at times called the alliance obsolete. Our allies are starting to wonder whether they can rely on the United States to come to their defense in a crisis. In an interview on CNN, Senator John Thune of South Dakota, the third-ranking Senate GOP leader, explained why the motion was needed. I think it is important that we demonstrate a strong commitment to the NATO alliance, Thune said. I mean, this is something that has served freedom-loving countries well for half a century. The motion also called on the administration to urgently prioritize the completion of a comprehensive whole-of-government strategy to counter malign activities of Russia that seek to undermine faith in democratic institutions in the U.S. and around the world. Critics have repeatedly accused Trump of being too close to Putin and not responsive to evidence of meddling by Russia in the last U.S. presidential election. 2 GOP senators, Mike Lee of Utah and Rand Paul of Kentucky, voted against the measure. Why is the U.S. Senate pushing to expand NATO when most of them aren't even paying their fair share? I stand with President Trump, Paul said in a tweet. Lee's office did not immediately respond to a request for an explanation why the Utah senator voted against the measure. So, when it comes to my thoughts on this, personally, NATO, now, the reason I think Trump opposes it is because his base is very against globalist sort of thinking, and NATO kind of envelops that. I don't think it's so much as he actually has a problem with what they're doing. He might, It's hard to know what the president is thinking. He's a very odd person, to say the least, but that's how I feel. And my feelings of NATO, I think it's good that the nations stay together. And I agree with the Senate on this one, personally. I find it interesting that Rand Paul and Mike Lee voted against it. Personally. It's definitely interesting, and it is sort of funny how the Senate is rebuking the president, and this is not the only story we're going to be covering today about the Senate rebuking him. We'll get to the next one very shortly. But, yeah, not a good thing for the president. And I guess I'll tell you my personal biases now, because part of this is my views on things. I mean, why would you watch me if you don't care about my views? You can get this news from anywhere else. When it comes to my views, I am a liberal and a progressive liberal of the Bernie Sanders type, not the Hillary Clinton type. That is my personal political philosophy. You can disagree, agree, but that is how I view things, and that's my personal bias. So I'll make that very clear and open for those watching. But yes, this is story number 3. Let's go to story number 4 if we can get to it. And speaking of Senate rebukes, here we got another one. For the second day in a row, the Senate pushed back on President Trump, showing stiff resistance to his key policy decisions on tariffs and NATO, even as the president's summit. Senators voted overwhelmingly Wednesday, calling on Trump to get congressional approval before using national security as a reason for imposing tariffs on other nations, as he did recently with steel and aluminum levies against Mexico, Canada, and the European Union. The bipartisan 88-11 tally on the 9 binding resolution sends a message to the White House about how frustrated senators are over Trump's disruptive moves on tariffs. However, future efforts to pass enforceable legislation likely face an uphill battle over Trump's objections. Let's be clear, this is a rebuke of the president's abuse of trade authority, said Senator Jeff Flake, an Arizona Republican and a frequent and vocal critic of Trump's policies. Can you imagine being Canada and being told your steel and aluminum exports to the U.S. are a national security threat? On Tuesday, the Senate voted 97-2 in favor of it, and we just covered that, so I'll skip that part. The tariff measure was written by Senator Bob Corker, a retiring Tennessee Republican who chairs the Foreign Relations Committee, and Senator Pat Toomey, a Pennsylvania Republican and free trader from a steel-producing state. They believe this vote will help build momentum for future tougher legislation, although it is not clear if they could get supermajority support in the Senate and House to override a likely veto, especially if Trump actively worked against it. This is a vote for Congress to assume its rightful role, Corker said. It's a baby step. The measure will require congressional approval of tariffs issued under Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962, which requires national security concerns to be the driving reason for imposing the tariffs. Mexico, Canada, and the European Union, longtime allies of the U.S., were incredulous they were considered a national security threat to the U.S. and issued tariffs against U.S. goods in response. The vote on the tariffs measure helps clear up another matter for Senate GOP leaders and Judiciary Committee Chairman Chuck Grassley, who are working diligently to get Trump's judicial nominees confirmed. Flake used his ability in a narrowly divided chamber to block appeals court judges as leverage for forcing a vote on the tariffs measure. That stalled action in the Judiciary Committee and on the floor, while GOP leaders worked to find a way to assuage Flake. Flake initially insisted he would only accept a vote on a substantive measure, but accepted the non-binding resolution instead. He told CNN he would lift his holds on those judges following this vote. Now, when it comes to my view on tariffs, I support them in some cases, oppose them in others. You have to do it smartly if you are going to do it. You can't just do it the way Trump did. And he did it the wrong way, especially using national security reasons. That just sounds goofy. And so I'm mixed on this. Obviously, I disagree with the free traders who are pushing against this, which almost every U.S. senator is a free trader, pretty much. Very few are actually pro-tariffs. Sherrod Brown of Ohio, Democrat, is one of the few exceptions there, I believe. But yeah, it's interesting. I don't know how to feel about this. I mean, it is funny. It's always funny to see the Senate, the Republican Senate, rebuke the Republican president. But at the same time, it's not really much of a rebuke. Keep in mind, it's non-binding. There's nothing substantive to this. It's just, we disapprove. Nothing more than that. And so if the Senate's really going to rebuke this, then they have to have it take a more thorough vote. And I don't think the Senate is going to take a more thorough vote, especially, with McConnell leading it. And by the way, for those who don't know, I'm in Indiana, and I live right next to Kentucky, so know a lot about Kentucky politics, and it's amazing that he's still a U.S. Senator. But yeah, those are my feelings on that story. And that would be story number 4, right? Now, I don't have a article for this one because I think a decent bit enough to cover this one. And that would be the SCOTUS battle. And what you need to know, or at least what I think needs to be known. So, of course, most of you know that Trump nominated someone to the Supreme Court recently, Anthony Kennedy, who was the swing vote on the court, retired, and now Trump has nominated Brett Kavanaugh to the U.S. Supreme Court. And obviously conservatives are very supportive. Liberals really oppose it. For those who don't know why this is important, it is very important because for one, Anthony Kennedy was a swing vote. And now he's likely to be replaced by a super conservative vote. Or that might not happen, depending on how the confirmation goes. So let me explain this. There are 9 justices on the Supreme Court. So when you have 4 one way, 4 the other way, that 5th one becomes the swing vote. And that is what Anthony Kennedy was. So if Brett Kavanaugh replaces him, then that is going to determine the future of the court for a good number of years until another conservative retires. And that's pretty significant. So the reason, of course, liberals and progressives oppose him is because he will be a conservative judge, and he's likely to approve a ton of conservative measures and make, for example, Citizens United. You're not going to see Citizens United overturned if he gets confirmed to the Supreme Court. There's a chance Roe v. Wade gets overturned. Now, of course, you never know. He's said he wouldn't overturn it because it's precedent, but you never know. Those might just be weasel words. The point is, it could happen. Roe v. Wade could be overturned. And that's not the only Supreme Court decision that's at jeopardy. The same-sex marriage legalization, that was just a few years ago, that's in jeopardy. So there's a number of things in the Supreme Court that are in jeopardy, and that makes this confirmation vote very important. So now let's talk about the chances of confirmation here. The Senate is the one that does this, and of course McConnell wants to fast track it as much as possible. Now, Democratic leadership opposes this, but the question is, how are the moderate Democrats and the moderate Republicans going to vote? Because that's who determines it. Republicans have exactly 50 senators in the U.S. Senate at this moment. They have a 51st, but they aren't at the Senate. John McCain is currently receiving treatment, so he can't be in the Senate. So it's just the 50 Republicans. So if all Republicans stay on board, then they can pass it alone, because the filibuster was removed by McConnell last year when Neil Gorsuch was confirmed to replace Antonin Scalia. So the question is, are the pro-choice Republican senators Suzanne Collins and Louisa Murkowski going to vote against this? Then the question becomes, how are the moderate Democrats going to vote? There were 3 Democrats who voted for Neil Gorsuch in 2017. Heidi Heitkamp of North Dakota, Joe Manchin of West Virginia, and Joe Donnelly of Indiana. And there's a new senator who wasn't there last time that might vote as well, Doug Jones of Alabama. Now, that's the thing. Obviously, I want them to oppose it, and that's, if you're a liberal worried about this, then the chances of this getting confirmed are pretty high. If you're a conservative, you should be very happy about that. A liberal, obviously not very happy. So for liberals, what you really got to do is, if you got to contact those senators. The ones I listed just now, Doug Jones, and that's the thing. It only matters a decent bit if you are in the States. So for example, I'm in Indiana, so I can contact Senator Donnelly, and that would make a difference because I am an Indiana constituent. So if you live in Indiana, if you live in West Virginia, if you live in North Dakota, and if you live in Alabama, if you live in any of those states, call those moderate Democrats and tell them that you oppose this nomination if you are a liberal. Obviously, if you're conservative, you're going to tell them the opposite, tell them to support it. Now I'll be covering updates on the SCOTUS ballot because it's a very important story. But here's hoping that the Senate denies him, though I am pretty doubtful, because these moderate Democrats have not come through for us in a lot of scenarios. Now, for the last story that we're covering today, many of you might remember the recent upset by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez against Joe Crowley. Well, they're still clashing. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez accused Democratic Rep. Joe Crowley on Thursday morning of plotting a third-party challenge to her in November, a charge Crowley vehemently denied. The claim set off a jarring and unexpected round of recriminations, especially surprising given how quickly the heat around the race seemed to dissipate after Ocasio-Cortez defeated Crowley in a New York Democratic primary last month. On the night of the vote, Crowley, who has served in Congress for 2 decades, picked up his guitar and dedicated Bruce Springsteen's Born to Run to Ocasio-Cortez. Speaking to CNN's Erin Burnett a day after her stunning upset, Ocasio-Cortez, a Democratic socialist and emerging hero on the progressive left, said she was moved by Crowley's gesture and praised him for handling the moment with such grace. Asked then if they had spoken, Ocasio-Cortez laughed. "We're looking for his phone number and we've been reaching out," she said. "I greatly look forward to having that conversation." But that conversation never happened, both campaigns said Thursday, as lingering tensions between them spilled out in the open on Twitter. In a pair of tweets, Ocasio-Cortez said Crowley had stood me up for all 3 scheduled concession calls, then claimed the party's 4th-ranked House member was mounting a third-party challenge against me in the Democratic Party. Here's the tweet itself. Joe Crowley stated on live TV that he would absolutely support my candidacy. Instead, he stood me up for all 3 scheduled concession calls. Now he's mounting a third-party challenge against me and the Democratic Party and against the will of the New York Working Families Party. Crowley shot back in a series of posts, maintaining that he would, as promised, when asked about the prospect of losing during the primary, support her in November. He also laid the blame for the lack of direct communications on the Ocasio-Cortez team. "I'd like to connect," he wrote, "but I'm not willing to air grievances on Twitter. Alexandria, the race is over, and Democrats need to come together. I made my support for you clear, and the fact that I'm not running. We've scheduled phone calls, and your team has not followed through. I'd like to connect, but I'm not willing to agree." As part of an endorsement that came before the primary, Crowley will be on the Working Family Party's ticket in November. Bill Lipton, the Working Families Party state director, confirmed that Crowley has, as for first reported in the New York Times, refused to go forward with the process that would see his name removed from the 14th Congressional District ballot. After Crowley responded publicly, calling the necessary maneuver to remove his name from the Working Families Party line a form of election fraud, his spokesman also accused Ocasio-Cortez, a 28-year-old first-time candidate, of misleading voters about the nature of her concerns. She's upset that Joe's name is still on the ballot in November and trying to intimidate and bully him into doing something he believes is unethical, the spokesperson said. "He's not running at all. He has no intention of running. He supports her vigorously. Words matter, which is why it's completely unfortunate that he's chosen to lie." Ocasio-Cortez spokesman Corbin Trent said a growing sense of lack of willingness to work together, along with Crowley's refusal to take his name off the Working Families Party ballot line, had largely prompted the tweets on Thursday. When you combine all those things together, and you know that you've got a candidate in Crowley that didn't really see this coming, right, and this totally changes the trajectory of his future, you worry. We literally just sent a bunch of staff off to other campaigns. Lipton strongly rejected Crowley's suggestion that the Working Families Party, and potentially employing a mechanism used by smaller parties to change position after major primaries, will be doing anything unethical or unusual. The Queens County Democratic leaders are the masters of electoral manipulation, Lipton said. There's a well-known process for removing candidates from the ballot, and they are refusing to show the Working Family Party and Ocasio-Cortez that respect. In the aftermath of her shock victory last month, Ocasio-Cortez became a national political figure and is using her status to boost other insurgent candidates. She has also been attacked on the right and in some cases been the subject of pushback from the Democratic establishment, who worry that her politics, should they pick up steam in other districts, could endanger the party's hopes of flipping the House this fall. So the main story there, as you may have picked, is that Joe Crowley will remain on the ballot. Now, and essentially this is a back and forth between two people. And obviously, as I stated in my political views before, it's obvious I agree with Ocasio-Cortez and that he should get off the ballot. It's scummy, and even if he isn't running, which is what he claims, but you know, he should still get off. And it's not like he's not able to. As Ocasio-Cortez said, he's the king of Queens. He has done tons of electoral manipulation throughout his 10-term career. He has been the Queen's chair. He has shot down primary challenges before with that power, challenging signatures. He has done tons of scummy things throughout his career. So him saying that it's election fraud is ridiculous. And also, when it comes to the stuff to where they accuse each other, who are you more likely to believe? A 10-term incumbent who just got upset and was destined for House leadership as a definition of the establishment? Or are you going to believe the upsetter, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who's just 28 years old, who was a bartender a year before it, and had much less money, and who's just won a nomination? Who would you believe? I believe the upstart, not the establishment person. So, now, I hope that Joe Crowley does the right thing. I'm not so sure, though. I'm not so sure. He is a scumbag. And if Ocasio-Cortez has to defeat him again in November, I'm sure she will be able to. And that is the last story of the day in this episode of The Latest in Politics. So I hope you enjoy the first episode of The Latest in Politics. This will be back sometime next week, either Monday or Tuesday, whenever I'm free, of course, you know. You may or may not be able to tell I'm a little young, so we'll have to see. But yeah, stay tuned for the next episode on The Latest in Politics. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned.